He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Elaine Mercer stood in the doorway of their kitchen, still in her coat, still holding the paper bag from the pharmacy. Prenatal vitamins she hadn't told him about yet, because she'd only taken the test that morning, because she'd wanted to find the right moment, because she thought maybe this would save them. She set the bag down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped trusting themselves. "What did you say?" Brandon Mercer finally looked up. His face was calm. That was the part that gutted her. Not anger, not guilt, not even the decency of discomfort. Just calm, like he'd rehearsed it. Like he'd been carrying this particular sentence around for weeks and was simply relieved to finally put it down. "It's not working," he said. "We both know it." She didn't cry, not then. She stood there and felt the kitchen's tilt slightly, the overhead light too bright, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. She thought about the test in her purse. She thought about the little pink lines she'd stared at for 3 full minutes in the gas station bathroom off Route 9, her hands shaking, her heart doing something she hadn't expected. Something that felt dangerously close to joy. She didn't tell him. She didn't tell him that night, or the night after, or the week his lawyer sent over the first draft of the divorce papers. She sat across from her own attorney, a woman named Ruth, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone who'd seen every version of this particular disaster. And she signed where Ruth told her to sign, and initialed where Ruth told her to initial, and somewhere in the middle of page 7, there was a clause she barely registered. Something about future claims, something about assets and liability, and Ruth said, "Standard language, don't worry about this part." And Elaine didn't worry about it because she was thinking about whether vitamins were still on the counter at home or whether she'd put them away, and whether the spare bedroom got enough light, and whether she was going to raise a child alone. She was 34 years old. She had a master's degree in urban planning. She had a job she was good at, a savings account that was decent but not extraordinary, a sister in Phoenix who would help if she asked, and a husband who had looked at her like a problem he'd finally solved the administrative paperwork on. She signed the papers on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had stopped crying in the car on the way to work. By the following Monday, she had started eating again. Real meals. Not crackers and peanut butter standing over the sink at midnight. By the end of the month, she had told her sister, who drove in from Phoenix and sat on Elaine's couch for 3 days straight eating takeout and watching terrible reality TV, and not saying anything particularly wise but being there, which was the only thing that actually helped. She told her sister about the pregnancy the second night, after a long silence and a glass of sparkling water she wished was wine. Her sister Francine put down her chopsticks and looked at her for a long time. "Does Brandon know? No, are you going to tell him?" Elaine thought about his face in the kitchen. That calm. "No," she said. "I don't think I am." Francine nodded slowly. She didn't push. That was the thing about Francine. She'd always understood that sometimes the decision is made before the words arrive to explain it. The pregnancy was not graceful. Elaine had imagined, in the vague, half-formed way you imagine things you're not ready to think about directly, that it might be manageable. She was healthy. She was organized. She had a system for everything. She color-coded her project files and kept a shared calendar with her team and had never once been late for a meeting in 11 years of professional life. Her body, it turned out, did not care about any of this. The nausea lasted 4 months. Not morning nausea, all-day nausea, the kind that made the smell of coffee unbearable, and the idea of driving past a fast food restaurant, something she had to actively prepare for. She lost 8 pounds in the first trimester and gained it back, and then some, in the second. She started working from home 3 days a week because her ankles swelled if she sat at her office desk for more than 2 hours, and her doctor said this was normal, and normal was a word that had started to feel like a joke. At 20 weeks, she found out she was having twins. She sat in the ultrasound room alone. She'd told the technician her partner couldn't make it, which was technically true, and stared at the screen where 2 small, blurry shapes moved in the dark, and she felt something break open in her chest that had nothing to do with grief. Two of them. She drove home in a kind of stunned silence, parked in her driveway, and sat there for 20 minutes before going inside. Then she called Francine, who screamed so loud Elaine had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Twins," Francine kept saying. "Elaine, twins? That's a lot," Elaine said. "That's incredible," Francine said. "That's the most incredible thing. You're going to be so tired. You're going to be so happy." She didn't feel either of those things yet. She felt the particular vertigo of a life that has just announced it will be bigger and more complicated than you'd planned, and also that it will require you to rise to meet it, whether you feel ready or not. She was not ready. She went to the next appointment alone, too, and the one after that. She painted the spare bedroom a pale yellow, neutral, calm, not committing to any particular set of assumptions about who these two people would be. She assembled a crib by herself on a Saturday afternoon and cried twice, and then figured it out. She found a prenatal yoga class on Tuesday evenings taught by a woman named Sandra, who was relentlessly encouraging in a way that Elaine initially found grating and eventually came to need. She did not think about Brandon, or rather, she tried not to. She did not always succeed. There were nights when the apartment felt very large and very quiet, and she would find herself in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, glass of water in hand, thinking about the early years. The years before he'd gotten the promotion and started working the hours that swallowed him whole. The years when they'd taken road trips on long weekends and argued about music and split omelets at the diner on Clement Street, and it had felt, genuinely, like something worth protecting. She didn't know when that changed. She suspected there was no single moment, just a slow, gradual drift, the kind that happens to people who are too busy and too proud to say, "We are drifting," before it becomes, "We have already drifted too far." She moved through the last months of the pregnancy, like someone crossing a long bridge in fog. She couldn't see the other side. She just kept walking. The girls came, 6 days before her due date, at 3:47 in the morning, both of them screaming with the full-throated confidence of people who have been waiting a very long time to make their opinions known. The first one, smaller, redder, angrier, came into the world looking exactly like someone who had not asked for any of this and intended to make that clear. The second followed 11 minutes later, calmer, wide-eyed, blinking at the lights, as if she'd already assessed the situation and found it manageable. Elaine held them both and felt her entire understanding of herself rearrange. She named them Ivy and June. Francine arrived the next morning with 3 bags of groceries, a bouquet of yellow tulips, and eyes that were red from the drive because she'd apparently cried for part of it. She stood next to the hospital bed holding June and made the specific sound that people make when they encounter something too real for words. A kind of long exhale, a shuddering breath. "Look at them," Francine kept saying. "Just look at them." Elaine looked. She did not stop looking for a very long time. She was in the hospital for 2 nights. On the second afternoon, a man knocked on the open door of her room. She didn't know him. He was tall, early 40s, wearing a jacket that was clearly expensive without trying to announce it, holding 2 paper cups of coffee with the uncertain air of someone who has arrived somewhere and is not entirely sure they have the right place. "Miss Mercer?" he said. "Elaine Mercer." She shifted upright in the bed, which was not easy with an IV still in her arm and a baby asleep on her chest. "That's me, and you are?" He looked slightly embarrassed. "Theodore Hale. We've actually met. Once, about 3 years ago, at the Infrastructure Symposium in Chicago. You gave a presentation on transit corridor development. I asked you a question after." She had no memory of this. She had given several presentations at several conferences, and she had fielded a lot of questions. "Okay," she said carefully. "I know this is strange," he said. He stayed in the doorway. She noticed that he hadn't moved further into the room without permission, which she registered as a point in his favor. "I'm in the hospital on a different floor. My mother had surgery yesterday. She's fine. It went well. And I ran into a nurse I know from the clinic I fund, and she mentioned..." He stopped. "I'm making this worse. You fund a clinic?" "A pediatric clinic. On the South Side. I've been involved in healthcare infrastructure for about 8 years. He paused. "I remembered your name from Chicago. When I heard you were here, I just wanted to say congratulations. I thought about reaching out before, but I didn't have a way to contact you. And then when I heard you were here, I thought maybe that was..." He looked at the cups of coffee he was still holding. "I brought coffee, which is obviously not something you need right now because you just had babies." Elaine looked at this man standing in her doorway with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of earnest, faintly mortified goodwill, and she felt, unexpectedly, like laughing. "I'll take the coffee," she said. He blinked. "Really? The nurses keep bringing me decaf. I've had about enough of that." He crossed the room and handed her a cup, and then stood at a respectful distance with his own cup and looked at the baby on her chest, with the quiet, slightly reverent expression of someone encountering something they don't want to disturb. "She's very small," he said. "They usually are," Elaine said. "There's another one in the bassinet." He looked. "Twins? Twins? You're doing this alone?" It was a blunt question. She appreciated that more than she would have expected. "For now," she said. "Yes." He nodded. He didn't push. "I'll let you rest," he said after a moment. "I'm sorry for barging in, genuinely." "Don't apologize," she said. "It was a strange thing to do, but it was a kind thing, too." He left. She drank the coffee, real coffee, strong and hot, and looked at her daughters and thought about the peculiar ways the universe occasionally announces itself. She didn't hear from Theodore Hale for 6 weeks. Then he emailed her through her professional address, which he would have been able to find easily enough, and the email was brief and courteous, and said that he was leading an advisory panel on public transit infrastructure funding in the metro area, and that her work on corridor development had been cited in 2 of the reports they were building from, and would she be interested in consulting. She sat with the email for a day. She was 6 weeks postpartum, sleeping in 4-hour increments, operating on a combination of coffee and stubbornness. She had not worked in 2 months. She had, recently, started to feel like herself again. Not the before-the-divorce self, not the pregnant and terrified self, but some new version of herself that hadn't existed until Ivy and June arrived and reorganized everything. She wrote back and said yes. The consulting work was good. It was the kind of work that reminded her why she'd chosen this field. Dense, technical, genuinely interesting, with stakes she could see on a map. Theodore, who ran his operation out of a converted building in the South Loop with exposed brick and too many whiteboards, was smart and direct and treated her assessments as if they were worth something, which, she realized with a slightly uncomfortable jolt, was not something she'd experienced consistently in her marriage. They started having coffee after meetings. Then dinners that went long and weren't really about work anymore. He was careful with her. She noticed that. He never pushed. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He made her laugh. Not the polite, obligatory kind of laughter that fills social silences, but the real kind, the kind that sneaks up on you. He met Ivy and June when they were 4 months old. He sat on the floor of her apartment and held June and talked to her with complete seriousness, as if she had opinions worth consulting, and June stared at him with the unblinking gravity of an infant who is not yet capable of performance, and reached out and grabbed his finger and didn't let go. "She's made her decision," he said. "She makes them fast," Elaine said. He looked up at her then, and there was something in his face that she hadn't seen from a man in a very long time. Not one exactly, or not only that, but something more careful and more considered. Like he understood the weight of the thing, and wasn't afraid of it. What she did not know, what none of them knew yet, was what was sitting in the records department of the county clerk's office, in a folder she hadn't thought about since the day Ruth told her not to worry about it. She found out in November. She was at her kitchen table, working late, girls asleep, when an email came in from Ruth. The subject line read, Mercer divorce filing, follow-up Clause 7D. She opened it. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for a long time. Clause 7D of the final divorce agreement, the one on page 7, the standard language, don't worry about it, had been an asset disclaimer that wasn't standard at all. It was a clause that signed away Elaine's rights to any future claims against shared professional assets, including intellectual property developed in part during the marriage. 3 years before they married, Elaine had co-developed a proprietary transit modeling framework with a former colleague. The colleague had since moved abroad. The framework had sat dormant in a joint filing, and Elaine had barely thought about it in years. But 8 months ago, around the time the divorce was being finalized, that framework had been licensed to a major regional transit authority for a 7-figure sum, and the licensing arrangement had been structured in a way that listed Brandon Mercer's consulting firm as co-administrator. Brandon had known. He had known and his attorney had known, and the clause on page 7 was not an oversight and was not standard language. She picked up her phone. She called Ruth. Ruth answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting. "I know," Ruth said before Elaine could say anything. "I found it last week. I've been going through everything." "He knew," Elaine said. "Yes, his attorney buried it." "Yes, Elaine." Ruth paused. "I should have caught it. I'm sorry. I will not charge you for what comes next. And what comes next is that I am going to take this apart piece by piece. Because what they did is not gray area. This is deliberate concealment of material financial information. This is fraud." Elaine sat in her kitchen while her daughters slept down the hall and felt something shift in her chest. Not the hot, immediate grief of the night he'd asked for the divorce, and not the stunned free fall of the weeks after, but something colder and more precise, something that knew exactly what it was. "What do I need to do?" she said. "Let me make some calls first. Don't contact him. Don't contact his attorney. Don't say anything to anyone until I tell you to." She didn't. What followed took 4 months and felt like living inside a machine she couldn't see. Ruth had been practicing family and civil law for 22 years. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that the system moves slowly, and the only response to that is patience and precision. She gathered documents. She filed motions. She contacted the licensing authority and obtained records. She found the paper trail that showed, unambiguously, that Brandon's attorney had flagged the framework valuation 6 weeks before the divorce was finalized, and that the clause had been added to the agreement the following day. Brandon's attorney tried to settle twice. Both times Ruth declined on Elaine's behalf. "They're scared," Ruth said during one of their calls. Scared is good. Scared means they know how this looks. Theodore knew something was happening. She'd told him, carefully, that there was a legal matter she was navigating, but she hadn't given him the details, and he hadn't pressed for them. He showed up on a Thursday evening with dinner and helped her put the girls to bed, and sat with her on the couch while she stared at the middle distance and didn't say a word until she was ready to talk. "He knew the whole time," she said eventually. "When he asked for the divorce, he'd already figured out how to take something from me on the way out." Theodore was quiet for a moment. "What does Ruth think the outcome looks like?" "She says if it goes to litigation, they'll lose. She says they know they'll lose, which is why they keep trying to settle." "And you?" Elaine looked at her daughter's bedroom door. She thought about the night she'd sat in that driveway for 20 minutes, unable to go inside. She thought about the gas station bathroom and the pink lines. She thought about page 7 of the divorce agreement and the woman she'd been, sitting across from Ruth, thinking about a spare bedroom and whether it got enough light. "I want them to answer for it," she said, in front of a judge. The case was resolved the following March. It did not go to trial in the end. Brandon's attorney folded 10 days before the scheduled hearing date, apparently having finally done the math on what discovery would surface. The settlement included the full value of the misappropriated licensing revenue, a financial penalty for concealment, and a formal censure filed against the opposing attorney with the state bar. Ruth called her from the courthouse steps. Her voice was matter-of-fact and a little tired, the voice of someone who has won a thing they were always going to win, but who knew better than to be surprised when the machinery takes this long. "It's done," she said. Elaine was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store. She'd been about to buy diapers and bananas. She stood still for a moment, keys in hand, and let the March cold come in around her, and felt the particular silence of a chapter that has finally cleanly ended. "Thank you," she said to Ruth, "for all of it." "Don't thank me," Ruth said. "You held. A lot of people don't." She told Theodore that evening. They were at his place, the girls sprawled on a blanket in the living room, working through the serious business of learning to sit up, which mostly involved sitting up for 2 seconds and then toppling sideways with expressions of mild indignation. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He signed his name to a clause he'd had buried specifically to take money from you," he said. "Yes. And the whole time you were navigating this, I didn't want it to be part of whatever this is," she said, "between us. I didn't want it to be the first thing." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Ivy, who had managed to remain upright for a record-breaking 4 seconds before listing gently to the left. "I think," he said slowly, "that you are one of the most capable people I've ever met. And I don't mean that as a compliment exactly. Or, not only that, I mean it the way you mean it when you're watching someone carry something heavy, and you realize they've been carrying it so long it looks light." She didn't say anything. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, "if that's what you're wondering." She hadn't let herself wonder it. Exactly. She had been very careful not to wonder it, but she had been wondering it. "Ivy likes you," she said. "June grabbed my finger first. June grabs everything. That's not a personality trait, that's a reflex." He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't try to be anything, just genuine, just easy, just real. "I like all three of you," he said, in case that wasn't clear. It was clear. It had been clear for a while. She'd just needed the other thing to be done first. The long, cold, necessary work of making Brandon Mercer answer for what he'd done, before she could let herself be in a room with something good without scanning it for the catch. Spring came. Ivy and June turned 8 months old and developed strong and contradictory opinions about pureed peas. Elaine went back to full-time work. She joined Theodore's advisory panel officially, and found, to no one's surprise, that they argued about methodology with the exact specificity of people who are both right about different things. She called her mother for the first time in 8 months. That was a different kind of conversation, longer and more complicated, involving old furniture and old grievances and the particular love that exists between people who have hurt each other in small ways for decades and are trying imperfectly to stop. On a Sunday in April, she was sitting on the floor of her living room with June on her lap, and Ivy rolling determinedly toward the coffee table, when her phone showed a message from a number she didn't have saved. She opened it. "I heard about the case. I want you to know I had nothing to do with the clause. It was Hartwell's doing, my attorney. I didn't know about it until this year. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. It was Brandon." She read it twice. She sat with it. She thought about whether she believed him. Whether it was possible that the man who had looked at her like a solved equation had nonetheless been genuinely ignorant of what his own attorney had done. She didn't know. She would probably never know. It didn't matter, she realized, as much as she'd thought it would. She set the phone down. June looked up at her with large, serious eyes. "I know," Elaine said. "It's a lot." June reached up and grabbed her finger, the way she grabbed everything, and held on. She didn't write back. There was nothing she needed to say that hadn't already been said in a courtroom by Ruth in March. The story of what happened between her and Brandon Mercer had an ending now, clean and documented, and she didn't need to add anything to it. What she needed was already here. In this apartment? In this Sunday. In the particular weight of a daughter's hand around her finger, and the particular slant of April light coming through the windows she'd chosen herself. In a life that looked nothing like what she'd planned and turned out, quietly and stubbornly and without asking permission, to be exactly enough.